the state that wouldn't stop growing. In America, there's one place growing so fast, it's starting to look less like a state and more like an entire country. Every single day, thousands of people pack their bags, leave behind expensive cities, crowded apartments, high taxes, and uncertain futures, and head to one destination: Texas. And what's happening there right now is shocking economists, changing American politics, transforming business, and rewriting the future of the United States itself. Some experts believe Texas could become one of the most powerful economic regions on Earth. Bigger than many countries, richer than entire nations, and more influential than people realize. But here's the real question. Why? Why are millions moving there? Why are giant companies relocating there? Why are jobs exploding there? And why are some people warning that Texas' unstoppable growth could eventually create massive problems no one is prepared for? Because the deeper you look into Texas, the crazier the story becomes. And by the end of this documentary, you'll understand why Texas is growing faster than almost anywhere in the developed world. So before we begin, subscribe to the channel, because we create powerful documentary-style videos about the cities, states, and places shaping America's future. And stay until the end. Because one hidden reason behind Texas' growth is something almost nobody talks about. And it could completely change where Americans choose to live next. The Great American Migration. It usually starts the same way. A family sits at a kitchen table late at night. Bills stacked everywhere. Rent going up. Gas prices rising. Groceries more expensive than ever. The parents are exhausted. The children are asleep. And someone finally says it. What if we moved? For millions of Americans, that question became real. Especially after 2020. Suddenly, people realized something important. For decades, places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York City dominated opportunity in America. That's where the jobs were. That's where the companies were. That's where ambitious people believed they had to go. But then everything changed. People started asking, why pay $4,000 for a tiny apartment when you could buy an entire house somewhere else? Why spend hours trapped in traffic when you could have space, safety, and lower costs? Why struggle financially in one state when another state offered opportunity and freedom? And almost overnight, Texas became the answer. The Texas dream. For many Americans, Texas began to represent something powerful. A second chance. A place where normal people could still build a life. That idea became magnetic, especially for middle-class families. Because in many parts of America, the middle class started disappearing. Home ownership became harder. Living costs exploded. Wages struggled to keep up. But Texas looked different. The houses were bigger. The roads were wider. The suburbs kept expanding endlessly into the horizon. And compared to coastal cities, Texas felt affordable. A young couple moving from California could suddenly afford a backyard, a garage, extra bedrooms, even land. For many people, it felt almost unreal. And the numbers reflected it. Cities across Texas started exploding in population. Austin became one of America's hottest tech cities. Dallas expanded rapidly into a giant corporate powerhouse. Houston continued growing as an energy and shipping giant. And San Antonio attracted families looking for affordability and stability. Texas wasn't just growing. It was transforming. the business invasion. But population alone doesn't explain Texas. The real explosion came from businesses. Large corporations began leaving high-cost states and relocating major operations to Texas. And the reasons were obvious. Lower taxes, cheaper land, business-friendly policies, less regulation, more space. Suddenly, Texas wasn't just attracting families. It was attracting power. Tech companies, energy giants, manufacturing firms, logistics companies, finance companies. One by one, they arrived. And when companies move, jobs follow. Austin, the new tech frontier. For years, Silicon Valley dominated the tech world. But then something unexpected happened. Tech workers started leaving California. Not because they stopped loving technology, but because many simply couldn't afford life there anymore. Austin became the alternative. Suddenly, young engineers, entrepreneurs, and startups flooded the city. Coffee shops turned into mini offices. Luxury apartments appeared everywhere. Home prices skyrocketed. The city's culture changed rapidly. Old Austin residents watched their quiet city become one of America's fastest-growing tech hubs. Some loved it, others hated it. And for the first time, some Texans began asking whether Texas was becoming too successful for its own good. But the momentum didn't stop, because something even bigger was happening behind the scenes. Texas wasn't just attracting workers. It was becoming critical to America's economy itself. The energy kingdom. Long before Texas became a tech giant, it was already an energy empire. Oil built modern Texas. For generations, massive oil fields created fortunes, industries, and entire cities. And even today, energy remains one of the biggest reasons Texas matters globally. The state produces enormous amounts of oil and natural gas. In many ways, Texas powers modern America. And while some predicted renewable energy would weaken Texas, the opposite partly happened. Texas adapted. Today, Texas is also becoming a major renewable energy producer. Wind farms stretch across huge plains. Solar energy projects continue expanding. So while the world changes, Texas keeps evolving with it. That flexibility became one of its greatest strengths. And investors noticed. Billions of dollars started pouring into Texas industries. Factories expanded. Warehouses multiplied. Infrastructure projects exploded. The state became an economic machine. But there was one thing Texas had that many places desperately lacked: land, space to expand. In many major cities around the world, growth eventually hits a wall. There's simply nowhere left to build. But Texas is enormous. The state has massive open spaces that allowed cities to keep spreading outward endlessly. New suburbs emerged constantly. New shopping centers appeared. New schools opened. Entire communities seemed to materialize from empty land. Developers loved it. Families loved it. Businesses loved it. Because expansion felt possible. And psychologically, that mattered. Texas represented possibility, not limitation. For many Americans, especially those leaving crowded coastal cities, that feeling became incredibly attractive. The idea that life could still grow bigger, better, more affordable. But every boom hides risks. And Texas was beginning to develop serious cracks beneath the surface. cracks that many newcomers didn't fully understand yet. The price of endless growth. Texas was supposed to be the escape. Cheaper homes, better jobs, more freedom, more opportunity. And for millions of Americans, it felt exactly like that. People flooded into Texas searching for a better life. Companies relocated by the thousands. Entire cities transformed almost overnight. But every boom comes with a cost. And in Texas, those costs were beginning to grow impossible to ignore. Because beneath the headlines about economic success, another story was quietly unfolding. A story about traffic, housing, power failures, water shortages, and a growing fear that Texas might eventually become a victim of its own success. And the deeper you look, the more intense the situation becomes. Because what's happening in Texas today may reveal the future of America itself. The California fear. There's a phrase that began spreading across Texas during the population boom. Don't California my Texas. For some Texans, the phrase became symbolic. Not necessarily about people themselves, but about fear. Fear that rapid migration would transform Texas culturally, economically, and politically. Many locals worried that newcomers from expensive coastal states would drive up housing costs, increase congestion, and change the identity of Texas cities forever. And in some ways, that fear became reality. Parts of Austin began feeling less like old Texas and more like a modern tech metropolis. Luxury condos dominated downtown skylines. Coffee shops filled with remote workers. Startup culture exploded. Meanwhile, older residents watched property taxes rise so high that some families were forced to leave neighborhoods they had lived in for generations. This created tension, because growth sounds exciting, until people begin feeling pushed out of their own cities. And Texas was growing so quickly that infrastructure struggled to keep up. The winter that changed everything. In February 2021, Texas experienced something devastating. A historic winter storm swept across the state. Temperatures plunged. Snow covered cities. Power systems failed. And millions of Texans suddenly lost electricity. Homes froze. Water systems collapsed. Families struggled to survive inside dark, freezing houses. The disaster shocked Americans nationwide. Because Texas was supposed to represent strength and economic power. Yet one winter storm exposed serious weaknesses in the state's infrastructure. People asked difficult questions. How could one of America's richest states experience such a massive failure? Why wasn't the energy grid prepared? Could Texas handle its own explosive growth? The event became a turning point. For many newcomers, it was the first moment they realized Texas wasn't invincible. Because growth creates pressure. And when infrastructure doesn't expand fast enough, systems begin breaking. But the power grid wasn't the only concern. Water was becoming another major issue. The water problem. Texas is huge, but much of it is also hot, dry, and vulnerable to drought. As millions more people moved into the state, demand for water increased dramatically. More houses, more businesses, more lawns, more factories. Everything required water. And experts began warning that some rapidly growing regions could eventually face severe shortages. Reservoir levels fluctuated. Drought conditions intensified. Why people still keep moving? Despite the challenges, Texas continues attracting massive numbers of people. And the reason is simple. For many Americans, Texas still represents opportunity. A construction worker can find jobs there. A small business owner can grow there. A young family can still buy homes in many areas more easily than in coastal states. Compared to some major American cities, Texas still feels accessible. That psychological difference matters enormously. Because when people feel trapped financially, they search for places where life still feels possible. Texas became that symbol. Even with rising prices, many newcomers still believe the state offers a better future than where they came from. And businesses continue betting billions that Texas' growth story is far from over. Factories continue expanding. Technology investment keeps increasing. Population projections continue climbing. Some experts believe Texas could eventually become America's most economically dominant state. But there's another side to this story most people outside Texas don't fully understand. Because Texas isn't growing evenly. Some cities are winning massively. Others are struggling. And the future of the state may depend on one giant question. Can Texas continue growing this fast without losing the very things that made people move there in the first place? The new American powerhouse. For decades, America's economic power seemed concentrated in just a few places. New York City controlled finance. Los Angeles dominated entertainment. San Francisco ruled technology. But while the world focused on the coasts, something massive was quietly rising in the middle of America. Texas, a state growing so quickly that some economists now compare its economy to entire countries. And the craziest part, Texas may still be only getting started. Because behind the scenes, a new economic empire is forming. An empire built on energy, technology, manufacturing, shipping, and population growth all happening at the same time. And if this transformation continues, Texas could completely reshape the future of the United States. But to understand how powerful Texas is becoming, you first need to understand one thing. Texas isn't succeeding by accident. It's competing aggressively. The war between states. Most people think of countries competing against countries. But in America, states compete too. They compete for people, for jobs, for companies, for investment. And in recent years, Texas became one of the most aggressive competitors in the nation. While some states increased regulations and costs, Texas positioned itself differently. Low taxes, business-friendly policies, cheaper land, faster development. For giant corporations, that combination became extremely attractive. Especially after the pandemic changed how businesses thought about location. Executives began asking difficult questions. Why remain in ultra-expensive cities? Why pay massive operating costs? Why fight for limited office space? Texas offered another option. Space, expansion, lower expenses, and access to a rapidly growing workforce. That's when the corporate migration accelerated. Silicon Valley's biggest threat. For years, Silicon Valley seemed untouchable. It was the center of global innovation, the birthplace of modern tech culture. But over time, success created problems. Housing prices exploded. Office costs skyrocketed. Competition intensified. And many tech workers began reconsidering where they wanted to live. That's where Texas entered the picture. Austin especially became symbolic of a new era. A city once known for music and culture suddenly transformed into a technology magnet. Young entrepreneurs flooded the city. Investors followed. Startups multiplied rapidly. Luxury apartments filled the skyline. Co-working spaces appeared everywhere. The city's identity evolved almost overnight. Some people even started calling Austin the next Silicon Valley. But Texas had one major advantage California struggled to match: scale. Texas had room to grow, and that meant companies could expand far more aggressively. Huge office campuses, massive industrial parks, large suburban developments. The expansion potential felt endless. And as technology combined with Texas' already powerful energy sector, the state's economy became incredibly diversified. That diversification made Texas stronger than many people realized. Because unlike cities dependent on a single industry, Texas had multiple economic engines running simultaneously. And then came manufacturing. The factory boom. Something important has been happening across America. Manufacturing is slowly returning. Companies increasingly want production closer to American consumers. Supply chain disruptions exposed vulnerabilities during the pandemic. Global tensions made some corporations rethink overseas dependence. Texas became one of the biggest beneficiaries. Factories expanded rapidly. Industrial construction exploded. Logistics centers spread across the state. Why? Because Texas has several advantages almost impossible to ignore. Large amounts of land, major highways, rail connections, ports, energy access, and proximity to both Mexico and the rest of the United States. Geographically, Texas sits in an incredibly powerful position. It connects multiple markets simultaneously. That makes the state ideal for shipping, trade, and manufacturing growth. And nowhere demonstrates this power better than Houston. Houston, the global giant most people underestimate. When people think about Texas, many imagine cowboys, oil fields, or Austin tech startups. But Houston may actually be the state's most important economic city. Houston is enormous. One of America's largest cities. One of the world's major energy capitals. And home to one of the busiest ports in the country. Massive ships move through its shipping channels constantly. Energy companies operate giant facilities nearby. International trade flows through the region every day. Houston connects Texas to the global economy. And because of that, Texas increasingly matters far beyond America itself. Some countries depend heavily on energy and goods connected to Texas industries. That gives the state extraordinary influence. In fact, if Texas were its own independent country, its economy would rank among the largest on Earth. Think about that for a moment. A single American state, with an economy bigger than many nations. And it keeps growing. But with growth comes competition. Because Texas isn't the only place fighting for America's future. Rivalry with Florida. Another state has also exploded in growth during recent years. Florida. Like Texas, Florida attracted huge numbers of migrants after the pandemic. Both states became symbols of low taxes, warm weather, and economic opportunity. And now, many experts see them as rivals competing for dominance. Texas offers massive industry, energy, and land. Florida offers tourism, finance, and global connectivity. Both states continue gaining political and economic power. Both are attracting businesses. Both are attracting retirees. Both are reshaping national migration patterns. And together, they are changing the balance of power inside America. Meanwhile, some older economic centers are losing population for the first time in generations. That shift is historic, because population movement changes everything. Congressional power, housing markets, business investment, infrastructure, even culture itself. And Texas sits directly at the center of this transformation. But despite all the success, there's a question looming over the future. Can this growth continue forever? Because cracks are beginning to appear. Housing affordability is worsening. Traffic keeps growing. Infrastructure struggles under pressure. And climate risks are becoming harder to ignore. The bigger Texas becomes, the harder it may become to sustain. Can Texas keep winning? For years, Texas seemed unstoppable. Millions arrived. Companies expanded. Cities exploded in size. Money poured in from every direction. And the message spreading across America felt simple. If you want opportunity, go to Texas. But now a new question is emerging. What happens when growth becomes too successful? Because history shows something important. Every booming place eventually faces a turning point. A moment where success creates pressure. Pressure creates problems. And problems begin threatening the very thing that made the place attractive in the first place. And Texas may be approaching that moment right now. Because while the state keeps growing at an astonishing speed, the future of Texas could become far more complicated than most people realize. The state becoming a superpower. If Texas were its own country, its economy would already rank among the largest on Earth. Think about how unbelievable that sounds. One American state, larger than many nations, more economically powerful than entire regions of the world. And every year, Texas keeps expanding. New factories, new office towers, new suburbs, new highways, new residents. The scale feels almost endless. Some projections suggest Texas could eventually become the most populated state in America later this century. That possibility would completely reshape the country. Because population means power. More workers, more businesses, more political influence, more economic control. And Texas is already influencing industries far beyond its borders. Energy, technology, shipping, manufacturing, construction. The state has become deeply connected to America's future economy. But growth alone doesn't guarantee stability. In fact, sometimes rapid growth creates dangerous weaknesses. The reason people keep coming. At its core, Texas sells something deeply emotional. Possibility. The belief that life can still improve. For many families, Texas feels like a place where dreams remain reachable. A house might still be possible. A business might still succeed. A better future might still exist. That emotional idea is incredibly powerful, especially during times of economic uncertainty. And as long as millions of people continue believing Texas offers opportunity, they will keep coming. Builders will keep building. Companies will keep investing. Cities will keep expanding. The Texas story will continue evolving. But whether Texas ultimately becomes America's greatest success story, or a warning about uncontrolled growth, remains uncertain, because the future of Texas is still being written right now, and the decisions made over the next 20 years could shape not only the future of one state, but the future of America itself. If you enjoyed this documentary-style series, subscribe for more deep stories about America's fastest-growing cities, states, and economic transformations. And while Texas continues changing the future of America, another state is quietly rising in ways almost nobody expected. Watch our next video to discover which state could become the next giant migration hotspot in the United States.